The Japanese destroyer's searchlight swept across the water like the finger of death. Missing our prow by mere feet, we tensed, throttles cut to idle, drifting in the darkness off Vella Lavella. 23 American sailors pressed against the deck of PT-164, trying to melt into the night. In the cargo holds of the 3 Japanese transports behind that destroyer, nearly 8,000 enemy soldiers sat unaware that their voyage to reinforce Kolombangara was about to end in the black waters of the Solomon Sea. The date was July 19, 1943, and in roughly 4 minutes we would unleash hell from the shadows. My hands clenched the twin .50 caliber mount so tightly my knuckles ached. Beside me, Ensign Robert Dutch Vanderberg murmured coordinates to our skipper, Lieutenant Commander Arthur M. McPhersonson. The green phosphorescent glow of our compass was the only light we dared expose. Behind us, hidden in the moon's shadow cast by Vella Lavella's volcanic peaks, PT-168 and PT-171 waited for our cue. We were America's covert weapons, and the Imperial Navy was about to discover why darkness was no longer solely their ally. My name is Chief Petty Officer Thomas Tom Harrigan, United States Naval Reserve, and I was one of the first to prove that small wooden boats could sink steel warships. People often ask me what it was like being part of the most tightly guarded naval secret of 1943. The truth is, we were too busy trying not to die to think about making history. We only knew that if we failed tonight, those 8,000 Japanese soldiers would reach Kolombangara, where they would slaughter American boys fighting to seize that strategic airfield. Every torpedo we carried represented hundreds of American lives that might be spared. Every enemy transport we sent to the bottom meant families back home who wouldn't receive that dreadful telegram from the War Department. To understand how 3 boats smaller than most private yachts could challenge the Imperial Japanese Navy at the height of its power, you need to understand what we faced in the summer of 1943. The Japanese had turned nocturnal combat into an art. Since their victory at Savo Island the previous August, where they sank 4 Allied cruisers without losing a ship, they dominated the darkness in the Solomons. Their sailors trained for years in night fighting, learning to operate without radar, using keen eyesight and practiced coordination. They called their nighttime supply runs the Tokyo Express. We called it the Rat Run. Either way, they moved troops and supplies with near impunity after sundown. The American Navy had bigger ships, superior radar, and more firepower. But we were losing the night war. Our admirals, schooled in the big battle tactics of Jutland and Manila Bay, couldn't adapt fast enough to this new form of combat. Our cruisers and destroyers, designed for fleet actions in open ocean, were sitting ducks in the confined waters of the Solomons. We needed something different, something the Japanese wouldn't anticipate. That something was being built in secret boatyards from New Orleans to New York, and it would revolutionize naval warfare. The PT boat, patrol torpedo boat, was born from desperation and American inventiveness. At 80 feet long and 20 feet wide, they were built of laminated mahogany plywood, not steel. 3 Packard V-12 engines, modified from aircraft power plants, pushed him to speeds over 45 knots, faster than any torpedo boat or conventional warship. We carried 4 21-inch torpedo tubes with Mark 13 torpedoes, a 20mm Oerlikon cannon, .50 caliber machine guns, and enough ammunition to wreak havoc for about 15 minutes of sustained fighting. After that, we better be heading home or heading to the bottom. I first saw a PT boat in February 1943 at the Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron's training center in Melville, Rhode Island. I was a destroyer sailor fresh from convoy duty in the North Atlantic when the Navy asked for volunteers for hazardous service with experimental vessels. The recruiter wouldn't tell us what these craft were, only that the casualty rate was expected to be over 50%. Out of 200 volunteers, they selected 40. I made the cut because I could navigate by stars and had small boat experience from growing up on Chesapeake Bay. The first time I stepped aboard PT 164, I thought the Navy had lost its mind. This wasn't a warship, it was a glorified speedboat with delusions of grandeur. The hull was wood. Wood in a war of steel and armor. The bunks were so cramped that hot bunking wasn't just common, it was mandatory. There was no armor protection except for a little sheet metal around the bridge. One good hit from anything larger than a rifle bullet and we'd be matchsticks floating on the water. But then I met Mac, and everything changed. Mac was 28, ancient by PT boat standards, with eyes that had seen too much already. He'd been at Pearl Harbor aboard the destroyer USS Shaw when the Japanese attacked, had fought at Midway, and volunteered for PT boats because, in his words, "I'm tired of being a target." Time to become the hunter. Mac understood something that took the rest of us weeks to learn. PT boats weren't meant to fight like conventional warships. We were maritime guerrillas, seagoing assassins who struck from ambush and vanished before the enemy could react. Our crew was a motley of misfits and specialists who'd never have served together on a regular Navy vessel. Dutch Vanderberg, our executive officer, was a Yale mathematics professor who could compute torpedo firing solutions in his head faster than most men could work a slide rule. Chief motor machinists mate Carlos, Charlie, Mendoza had built racing engines in Los Angeles before the war and could make our temperamental Packards purr like kittens or roar like lions depending on what we needed. Radioman Second Class William Sparks Patterson came from the submarine service where he'd learned to operate radios in absolute silence. Our torpedoman, gunner's mate First Class Patrick, Paddy, O'Brien, was an artist with those mechanical fish. Each Mark 13 torpedo weighed over a ton and cost as much as a house back home. Paddy treated them better than most men treated their wives, constantly adjusting, cleaning, and sweet-talking them. "These beauties," he'd say while polishing the bronze propellers, "are the only reason the Japs will take us seriously. One shot, one kill, or we're just expensive target practice." The rest of our 12-man crew included 2 more gunners, an engineer, a cook who doubled as a medic, and 3 seamen who did everything else. We were black and white, city boys and farm kids, high school dropouts and college graduates, united by one simple fact: we were all volunteers who'd signed up knowing we probably wouldn't survive the war. Training at Melville was brutal and unforgiving. The Navy had learned from early PT boat losses that enthusiasm wasn't enough. We had to be faster, smarter, and more ferocious than anything the Japanese could throw at us. We practiced high-speed attacks until we could launch torpedoes accurately while bouncing across waves at 40 knots. We learned to navigate by sound and instinct when tropical squalls reduced visibility to nothing. Most importantly, we learned to think like pirates rather than sailors. Commander James, Jim, Patterson, who ran the training program, had survived the Philippines campaign and escaped Corregidor on one of the last PT boats out. He had a simple training philosophy: the Japanese expect you to fight fair. Don't. They expect you to follow naval tradition. Don't. They expect you to fear the dark. Make them fear it instead. He taught us that our greatest weapons weren't our torpedoes, but surprise, speed, and sheer audacity. We arrived at our forward base at Renava on June 30th, 1943, just as the invasion of New Georgia was beginning. The base was nothing more than a fuel dump, some camouflaged Quonset huts, and a rough dock hidden under palm fronds. The first thing we noticed was the smell: rotting vegetation, diesel fuel, and the sweet stench of tropical decay. The second thing was the sound of artillery from New Georgia, where Marines were dying to take the Munda airfield. Motor Torpedo Boat Squadron 9. Our unit consisted of 12 PT boats tasked with interdicting Japanese reinforcement attempts in the Central Solomons. Our mission sounded simple: patrol the waters between the major Japanese bases and sink anything flying the rising sun. The reality was far more complex. These waters were a maze of coral reefs, volcanic islets, and hidden enemy strong points. The Japanese had seaplanes for reconnaissance, coastwatchers on every significant island, and destroyer squadrons specifically trained to hunt PT boats. Our first patrol on July 5th was a disaster. 3 boats, including ours, attempted to intercept a Japanese convoy near Vutuvutu. We were spotted by an enemy float plane before we could get into attack position. Suddenly 4 destroyers bore down on us with searchlights blazing and guns opening up. We scattered like rabbits, racing through a gauntlet of shell splashes. PT-158 took a direct hit from a 5-inch shell and disintegrated. 12 men gone in an instant, blown to fragments along with their boat. We spent 4 hours dodging through reefs and islands before escaping. No torpedoes fired, no enemy ships damaged, and we'd lost a boat and crew. That night, huddled at Renava, Mac gathered us. "We learned something important today," he said quietly. "We can't fight them like destroyers fight each other. We're not built for gun duels. We strike from ambush or we don't strike at all." It was a bitter lesson, paid for in blood, but it shaped every mission after. Over the next 2 weeks we developed new tactics through trial and error. We learned to use the island's radar shadows to mask our approach. We discovered that shutting down 2 engines and running on one reduced our acoustic signature dramatically. Most importantly, we figured out how to coordinate attacks between multiple boats using simple light signals the Japanese couldn't intercept. The intelligence network supporting us was remarkable. Australian coastwatchers hiding in the hills of Japanese-occupied islands radioed enemy ship movements. Native Solomon Islanders, risking execution if caught, paddled their canoes out to meet us with intelligence about Japanese positions. Sometimes we'd get decrypted intelligence from Pearl Harbor giving us exact convoy schedules, but most of the time we hunted by instinct and experience. The PT boats were still classified as secret weapons in July 1943. Official Navy communications never mentioned us by name, referring only to small craft or mosquito boats. The Japanese knew something was hitting their convoys, but their initial reports described us as submarines or mines. They couldn't believe the Americans would send wooden speedboats against steel warships. That ignorance was our greatest advantage. On the night of July 18th, Coastwatcher reports indicated a major Japanese reinforcement convoy would transit Blackett Strait, heading for Vanga, Kolombangara. This was the target we'd been waiting for. Multiple transports with minimal escort forced to pass through narrow waters where their numbers wouldn't help them. Mac volunteered our boat to lead the attack along with PT-168, skippered by Lieutenant Henry, Hank, Bramwell, and PT-171 under Lieutenant Junior Grade Joseph, Joey, Antonelli. The briefing that evening was tense. Intelligence estimated 3 large transports escorted by 1 or 2 destroyers carrying elements of the Japanese 13th Regiment, elite troops who'd fought in China and the Philippines. These weren't construction battalions or supply units. These were frontline soldiers who would make our Marines' lives hell on New Georgia. Commander William Bill Specht, our squadron leader, made it clear, "Gentlemen, this convoy cannot reach Vanga. I don't care if you have to ram those transports. They go to the bottom tonight." As the sun set on July 19th, painting the sky blood red over the Solomons, we made final preparations. Paddy O'Brien ran through his torpedo checklist for the 5th time, setting the Mark 13s for a depth of 10 feet and a running speed of 28 knots, optimal settings for striking a loaded transport. Charlie Mendoza had our engines tuned to perfection, mufflers installed to reduce noise. Dutch rechecked and rechecked our attack approach, calculating currents, wind, and the moon's position. I inspected my machine guns once more, ensuring the ammunition belts fed smoothly. We loaded armor-piercing incendiary rounds only. Regular ball ammunition was useless against steel ships, but API rounds could punch through bridge windows, start fires, and suppress gun crews. Every fifth round was a tracer, creating streaks of light that looked like deadly fireworks in the night sky. At 20-30 hours, we slipped our moorings and headed into the gathering darkness. The three boats moved in column, engines muffled to a low rumble. As we cleared Renava Harbour, Mac ordered weapons tests. The night erupted briefly with gunfire as 12 machine guns and 3 20mm cannons barked into empty sea. Then silence again, broken only by the rhythmic pulse of our engines and the hiss of water along hulls. The ocean was rougher than we'd hoped, a 2-foot chop that would make torpedo accuracy challenging. But it also meant our wakes were harder to spot, wave action masking engine noise. Every advantage mattered when you were 80 feet of plywood attacking 400-foot steel. By 2,300 hours we reached our ambush position off the north coast of Vella Lavella. Mac cut engines to idle and we drifted, waiting. The only sounds were water lapping at the hull and distant artillery rumble from New Georgia. Then, at 2,347, Sparks Patterson picked up a transmission from a coastwatcher reporting 3 large ships, 2 escorts bearing 280, speed 18 knots, range 15 miles from your position. The hunt was on. We restarted 2 engines, keeping them at low throttle as we moved to intercept. The math was simple and crucial. The enemy convoy made 18 knots on a steady course. We could make 35 knots without creating too much wake. If we positioned correctly, we'd intercept them as they entered the narrowest part of Blackett Strait, where they'd have no room to maneuver. At 0018 hours, Dutch spotted them through binoculars, dark shapes against the starfield, exactly where they'd be. 2 destroyers led, 3 transports followed, another destroyer brought up the rear. They showed no lights, but size and spacing made them easy to track once you knew where to look. Mac's plan was elegantly simple and incredibly dangerous. PT-168 would attack from the port side, PT-171 from starboard, and we'd run straight up the middle after the lead transport. It meant threading the needle between destroyers, but if it worked, we'd sow maximum confusion and get clean shots at all 3 transports. "All ahead slow," Mac whispered. We crept forward at 5 knots, barely moving, letting the convoy come to us. At 2,000 yards we could hear their engines, deep thrumming diesels pushing thousands of tons. At 1,500 yards we could discern details: the pagoda-style bridge of the lead destroyer, cargo booms on the transports, figures moving on deck. At 1,000 yards Mac gave the signal. 3 clicks on the radio and all 3 PT boats surged forward together. Engines roared from idle to full throttle in seconds, lifting our bow as we accelerated to attack speed. The night shattered as we raced toward the convoy at 40 knots, 3 small craft challenging steel giants. The Japanese were caught completely off guard. Their lookouts, trained to spot submarines or approaching destroyers, never expected attackers charging this fast from this close. We were inside their formation before they could react, racing between escort destroyers at point-blank range. I opened up with my twin, 50s, raking the bridge of the nearest destroyer, seeing my traces punch through windows and spark on steel. "Fire 1, fire 2, I shouted. Paddy launched our first 2 Mark 13 torpedoes at 600 yards, an almost impossible close range where missing was unlikely. The mechanical fish leaped from their tubes and splashed into the water, their props already churning. Twin wakes of phosphorescent bubbles streaked outward. A converted passenger liner carrying over 3,000 Japanese soldiers loomed ahead. The destroyer to our starboard finally reacted, swinging its searchlight. The brilliant beam found us instantly, blinding in its intensity. Immediately their 25mm anti-aircraft guns opened up, green traces reaching out like lethal fingers. Shells splashed so close that spray soaked everyone on deck. Then our torpedoes hit. The first struck just aft of the bridge with a thunderous explosion that lit the night like lightning. The second hit midship, breaking the transport's back. The 8,000-ton vessel lifted partially out of the water and split in two, both sections beginning to sink. Through the searchlight glare and gunfire we saw hundreds of Japanese soldiers spilling into the sea, their screams audible even over our engines. PT-168 struck next. Both Mark 13s slammed into the second transport. That ship, loaded with ammunition and fuel for the Vanga garrison, exploded like a volcano. The blast knocked me off my feet and a wave of superheated air washed over our boat. Flaming debris rained down, starting small fires on our wooden deck that we frantically stomped out. The Japanese destroyers were responding now but faced an impossible problem. We were too close for their main guns to depress low enough to hit us, and we were mixed among their own transports, dangerous for them to fire. Their solution was to try ramming, using size to run us down. The nearest destroyer turned hard toward us, its knife bow aimed at our beam. At the combined closure speed we had maybe 10 seconds before impact. Mac threw the wheel hard right and pushed throttles past stops. Our engines screamed, but we pivoted like ballet dancers, missing the destroyer's bow by less than 10 feet. As we passed, I emptied a full belt of ammo into their bridge at point-blank range, sparks flying as bullets struck home. PT-171 wasn't so lucky. Joey Antonelli had lined up perfect shots on the third transport, but a destroyer caught them in the searchlight before they could fire. The enemy's 25mm guns stitched holes across PT-171's bow. One shell hit a torpedo, but miraculously it didn't detonate. The warhead needed to arm by spinning in water. Still, Joey had to abort and flee, streaming smoke and taking on water. We came around for another pass, but the element of surprise was gone. Every searchlight in the convoy now swept the water, and guns of every caliber fired in all directions. The sea around us was torn by so many shell splashes it looked like a rainstorm. Worse, they brought their 5-inch guns to bear. Those could blow us to splinters with one hit. "Launch remaining fish and get us out of here," Max shouted over the din. Paddy fired our last 2 Mark 13s at the remaining transport, but the ship's captain saw them and combed the wakes, turning parallel so both torpedoes passed harmlessly along his sides. Then we ran, all engines at maximum, weaving between splashes as we fled into darkness. Behind us the battle raged. PT-168, despite several hits, managed to put one more torpedo into the already sinking second transport. The ammunition ship's death throes lit the strait. Secondary explosions rippled through her hull as she went down. 2 of 3 transports were gone, carrying nearly 6,000 Japanese soldiers with them. The third transport and destroyers were unscathed but thoroughly shaken. We regrouped 5 miles south of the engagement area, 3 boats battered but afloat. PT-171 was worst off with multiple holes at the waterline and 1 engine dead. We came alongside and transferred wounded while our carpenter's mates patched holes with whatever we had, mattresses, life jackets, even canned goods. PT-168 had lost her radio antenna and taken shrapnel through the superstructure but remained capable. Our boat had escaped with minimal damage, some shrapnel holes, a burned gun barrel from overheating, and scorch marks from near misses. But we were alive and we'd accomplished our mission. 2 transports definitely sunk, thousands of enemy soldiers killed and Japanese reinforcement schedules disrupted. The surviving transport, rather than continue to Vanga, reversed course and headed back to Rabaul. The return to base was tense. Japanese float planes searched at first light. We hid in the shadow of small islands, camouflaged with palm fronds, engines off, barely breathing as enemy aircraft droned overhead. It took us 14 hours to cover what should have been a 3-hour journey, but we all made it back to Renava. The debrief was exhaustive. Intelligence wanted every detail: enemy tactics, weapon effectiveness, response times. What we told them was distributed to every PT squadron in the Pacific. Lessons learned from our engagement saved American lives and sank enemy ships throughout the remaining war. But the immediate impact was even greater. Radio intercepts revealed Japanese communications describing new American secret weapons and high-speed torpedo boats appearing from nowhere. For the first time, the Imperial Navy feared the dark. They could no longer move freely at night, could not guarantee safe passage even for heavily guarded convoys. Every shadow might hide a PT boat. Every sound might be American engines approaching. Over the following weeks, the Japanese altered their entire resupply strategy. Convoys grew larger but less frequent. Destroyer escorts doubled, then tripled. They began using searchlight-equipped float planes for night reconnaissance. All these changes meant fewer supplies and reinforcements reaching garrisons, giving our ground forces crucial advantages. The psychological impact was perhaps even greater than the tactical success. Japanese soldiers waiting for reinforcements that never came began to lose hope. Enemy commanders, unable to guarantee supply deliveries, had to cancel offensives. The myth of Japanese invincibility at night, shattered by wooden boats crewed by American teenagers and reservists, began to crumble across the Pacific. Our squadron's success led to rapid expansion of the PT program. New bases sprang up across the Solomons and New Guinea. Improved boats with better engines, radar, and armor were rushed into production. Tactics we developed through trial and error became official doctrine taught at training centers from Rhode Island to California. The cost of this success was measured in friends who didn't come home. 2 weeks after our attack, PT-166 hit a mine while returning from patrol. Everyone lost. PT-162 was caught by Japanese destroyers in daylight when engine failure left her dead in the water. They cut her to pieces. Only 3 survivors were pulled from the sea. Joey Antonelli, skipper of PT-171, was killed by a sniper while his boat refueled at a forward base. By October 1943, when I rotated back to the States for new construction training, our squadron had lost 7 boats and 73 men. But we'd sunk or damaged over 40 Japanese vessels, from destroyers to barges, and killed thousands of enemy soldiers who never reached their destinations. The exchange was brutal but necessary. Every PT boat lost was replaceable. The Japanese ships and veteran crews were not. I returned to the Pacific in March 1944 as executive officer of PT-321 operating in the Philippines. The boats were improved: radar, cockpit armor plate, more reliable torpedoes. But the essence remained the same. We were still proving that American ingenuity could overcome any advantage. The Japanese never fully adapted to the PT threat. They tried everything: hunter-killer groups, radar-equipped destroyers, even suicide boats designed to ram us. But they couldn't be everywhere, protect every convoy, or make the night safe again. The secret weapon they'd discovered too late permanently shifted the balance of power in the Pacific. McPhersonson survived the war, earning a Navy Cross and 2 Silver Stars. He stayed in the Navy, eventually commanding a destroyer squadron in Korea. We kept in touch until his death in 1987. At his funeral, his son told me Mac often said the PT service taught him what real courage meant, not the absence of fear, but action despite terror. Dutch Vandenberg returned to Yale after the war, but never forgot navigation lessons learned in the Solomons. He became a leading oceanographer, using skills honed dodging destroyers to map ocean currents and underwater mountains. Charlie Mendoza went back to building racing engines, applying tricks learned keeping PT engines running to make cars go faster. His garage became legendary among hot rodders with a sign that read "Speed Shop." He'd tell customers, if I can make 4,500 horsepower push 50 tons at 45 knots. I can make anything go fast. Paddy O'Brien stayed in the Navy, becoming one of the service's leading torpedo experts. He wrote the manual on Mark 13 maintenance used for decades. He never forgot those fish we fired off Vella Lavella. Those were my fish that sank those transports, he'd say with pride. 2 shots, 2 hits, 6,000 Japanese who never made it to kill Americans. The PT boat story is often overshadowed by bigger battles, Midway, Guadalcanal, Late Gulf, but for those of us who served on these tiny wooden warriors, we knew we'd been part of something revolutionary. We proved that technology and courage could overturn tradition and size. We showed that American sailors, many of whom had never seen the ocean before Pearl Harbor, could outfight the best navy in the world at their own game. The secret of our success wasn't really the boats, though they were engineering marvels. It wasn't purely our torpedoes either. The real secret was the American spirit of innovation, the willingness to try something completely different when conventional methods failed. While admirals initially dismissed PT boats as toys, junior officers and enlisted men proved that toys with teeth could change a war's course. Every time I read about modern naval warfare, missile boats, stealth craft, asymmetric tactics, I see the legacy of those PT boats. We showed naval combat didn't have to be about battleships slugging it out at 20,000 yards. It could be about speed and stealth, hitting where the enemy least expected and vanishing before they could respond. Every fast attack craft today carries PT boat DNA. The Japanese phrase that entered their navy in 1943 translated roughly to mosquito boat terror, a fear that spread through their fleet. Post-war interviews with Japanese officers revealed that PT boats caused disruption far beyond actual numbers. They had to assume we were everywhere, plan for attacks that might never come, and divert resources to guard against shadows. Admiral Tanaka Riso, who commanded many Tokyo Express runs, wrote after the war, "The American PT boats were our worst nightmare. Submarines we could hunt, aircraft we could see coming. But these devil boats appeared from nowhere, struck like cobras, and vanished into the night. That fear and uncertainty we created was worth more than any number of ships sunk." The technical evolution of PT boats during the war was remarkable. Early boats were essentially peacetime designs pressed into combat. By 1945, PT boats carried radar, rockets, improved torpedoes, and even primitive guided munitions. But the core concept never changed: small, fast, deadly, crewed by volunteers willing to take insane risks. One story that captures the PT spirit happened in October 1944 during the Battle of Late Gulf. A flotilla of PT boats, hopelessly outgunned, harassed the Japanese battleship force, forcing evasive action and buying time for American carriers and escorts. Small boats didn't sink the giants that day, but their courage saved American lives. The PT bases themselves became legends: Renava, Tulangi, Munda, Wewak, exotic names that meant mosquitoes, malaria, and midnight missions. These weren't Pearl Harbor or San Diego with officers' clubs and clean sheets. These were muddy hellholes where we lived on Spam and cigarettes. Mail took months to arrive, and the only entertainment was poker and rumor. But morale remained high because we knew we mattered. The islanders of the Solomons deserve special recognition. They risked everything to help us, guiding us through reefs, rescuing downed airmen and shipwrecked sailors, providing intelligence on Japanese movements. Many were executed when caught assisting Americans. Their courage and sacrifice were essential. Without them, we'd have been blind in those island mazes. The coast watchers, lonely volunteers hidden on occupied islands with radios and binoculars, were our guardian angels. They'd report 40 bombers heading your way, or destroyer squadron moving south at speed. Many times their warnings saved our bases from surprise or helped us set perfect ambushes. We never met most of them, but we owed him our lives. Radar revolutionized PT operations. Early sets were primitive and barely distinguished an island from a ship. By late 1944, we could track targets in darkness and fog. The Japanese, who relied on superior night vision and training, found themselves at a disadvantage. We could see them before they could see us, a decisive edge in night combat. Our tactics evolved constantly. We used foil strips to confuse enemy radar, developed wolfpack tactics, coordinated multi-boat attacks, and used shore batteries as diversions, baiting the enemy to reveal positions while we maneuvered for the kill. The most dangerous missions were the ones nobody heard about: inserting coastwatchers behind enemy lines, evacuating trapped Marines from surrounded beaches, running ammo to isolated outposts under fire. These weren't glamorous torpedo attacks, but grinding, perilous work that saved countless lives. We became the Navy's Swiss Army knife, used for jobs too hazardous or too crazy for conventional vessels. Personal relationships aboard PT boats were unique. On a destroyer with 300 men, you might not know everyone's name. On a PT with 12, you knew everything: who snored, who had nightmares, who got seasick, who could be counted on when things fell apart. That intimacy created bonds lasting a lifetime. Decades later, our reunions felt like family gatherings because that's what we were: a family forged in combat. The food on PT boats deserves comment. We lived on K rations, spam, powdered eggs, and whatever we could trade. Fresh water was precious, rationed for drinking. We washed in seawater and salt crystals chafed. Coffee, black and strong enough to float a wrench, was our lifeblood. Some crews got creative, fishing with hand grenades or trading torpedo alcohol to base personnel for real food. Maintenance was constant and critical. Saltwater corroded everything. Tropical heat rotted wood and fabric. High-speed operations stressed components to their limits. We spent more time fixing boats than fighting from them. Every man became mechanic, carpenter, and electrician by necessity. A PT with engine failure in enemy waters was a death trap. We treated maintenance like religion. Weather in the Solomons was a constant enemy. Tropical squalls could appear suddenly, turning calm seas into mountains of water. Lightning could fry radios. Heat and humidity were oppressive. Men passed out at their posts. But bad weather was also our friend, hiding us from aircraft and making small boats harder to detect among wind-driven waves. Navigation there required skills they never taught at Annapolis. Charts were often wrong, based on surveys from the 1800s. Coral reefs shifted after storms. We learned to read watercolor and wave patterns, to smell land before seeing it, to navigate by instinct when instruments failed. Every successful patrol added to our mental map of those deadly waters. The Japanese response evolved. They developed shallow draft destroyers to hunt us, coordinated search patterns using float planes and surface ships, and even used captured PT boats as decoys. But for every countermeasure they developed, we devised another. It became a deadly game of chess played at 40 knots in the dark. The psychological toll was heavy. Living on edge, knowing any patrol could be your last, watching friends die in horrific ways, it marked us all. Some cracked, requesting transfers and labeled cowards. Others became addicted to adrenaline, volunteering for ever riskier missions. Most of us endured, finding ways to cope with fear that never really left. Our humor grew dark but necessary. We named boats Sudden Death, Hell's Angels, Grim Reaper. We painted cartoons on torpedoes. Donald Duck riding a torpedo was popular. We made grim songs about sinking Japanese ships. It was psychological armor, a way to make the unbearable bearable. PT boats influenced warfare beyond the Pacific. When Normandy was planned, PTs were included to guard against German E-boats. Lessons from the Solomons were applied in the Mediterranean, the English Channel, and riverine warfare worldwide. American PT doctrine inspired similar programs in many navies. Looking back, It's astonishing we survived. We were mostly kids playing with deadly toys in a war that killed millions. We made mistakes that should have killed us, took risks that make me shudder in retrospect. But we also accomplished something remarkable. We turned an untested concept into a war-winning weapon. We proved American innovation and courage could overcome any obstacle. The legacy of PT boats endures. Every fast attack craft, special operations boat, and vessel designed to strike quickly and vanish carries the DNA of those plywood speedboats. The sailors who crew them may not know Knights off Vella Lavella, but spiritual descendants carry on the tradition of speed, surprise, and audacity. When people ask if I'm proud of my service, I tell them about that night of July 20th, 1943. 3 small wooden boats attacked a major convoy and sent thousands of Japanese soldiers to the bottom. We emerged from darkness and vanished before the enemy could respond. We were America's secret weapon, and we changed the Pacific War's course. The Japanese were stunned not just by our boats, but by what they symbolized: American willingness to innovate, to take risks, to defy conventional wisdom. They had studied our Navy for decades, our battleships, carriers, traditions, and tactics, but they never imagined we'd send wooden speedboats armed with torpedoes to challenge their steel warships. That failure of imagination cost them dearly. In the end, the PT boat story is uniquely American. We adapted a British concept, powered it with aircraft-derived engines, armed it with destroyer torpedoes, and crewed it with civilians who'd never seen the ocean before Pearl Harbor. It shouldn't have worked, but it did because we made it work through sheer determination and ingenuity. The last operational PT boat was retired in 1959, replaced by faster, more capable vessels. But for those who served on them in World War II, they'll always be the boats that helped win the Pacific. We proved that size doesn't determine victory, that courage matters more than armor, and that wooden boats could defeat anyone, anywhere, anytime. As I finish this account, sitting in my study surrounded by faded photos and yellowed clippings, I can still hear those Packard engines roaring in the night. I still feel the Solomon spray on my face, smell cordite and diesel fumes. Most of all, I feel the pride of being part of something revolutionary. Boys who became men in wooden boats, fighting a war we didn't start but were determined to finish. We attacked from darkness because that's where we were strongest, where speed and surprise gave us advantage. The Japanese learned to fear the darkness they once owned, to fear that American ingenuity could turn any disadvantage into an advantage. That's the legacy of PT boats, not just ships sunk or battles won, but proof that free people fighting for freedom can overcome tyranny. We were small, fast, and deadly. We were secret weapons that stayed secret long enough to turn the tide. We were the mosquito fleet that brought down an empire, one torpedo at a time. The Japanese were stunned by America's secret PT boats because they represented everything the Imperial Navy hadn't expected: innovative thinking, bold tactics, and willingness to risk everything on an unproven idea. By the time they grasped the threat, it was too late. The shadows they had once ruled now belonged to us, and from those shadows we struck without mercy until the rising sun finally set on Japan's Pacific Empire.